I like to think this story belongs here, but if it doesn't, let me know, and I'll be happy to move it. It's not unusual for me to trek out on solo hiking day trips. For context, I'm a 31-year-old female. I frequently visit the nearby provincial parks, Canadian here, that are generally well used. It's rare I end up on a hike not seeing at least one or two people. I grew up going on camping and hiking trips, and feel very comfortable out in nature. I always inform people where I'm going and when I expect to be back. Safety first, right? One day, last year, I was going stir-crazy, so I took myself out to a popular nature educational center. A bunch of trails stemmed from this one spot, and they're not long trails, but are all interconnected, so it's easy to create your own distance. It was midweek, so I wasn't expecting to encounter many people, maybe a school group at most. So I grab my backpack, lock the car, and head out. It was a beautifully sunny day, mid-autumn, so it was a little chilly out. I was listening to the sounds of nature surrounding me. Some squirrels, birds, and even a deer crossed my trail at one point. I was sticking with the main trail, which had educational signs identifying the different types of plants as you went along. I've been trying to teach myself how to identify different trees on site, so this path was the best. I made my way up the first little hill, and made my way down the path where it makes a sharp right turn. Up ahead, I caught sight of a man wearing a dark blue jacket. Strange I hadn't seen any signs of the person or heard them, but whatever. Normally I'm comforted seeing someone else, but this time my gut instinct was not happy. I made a note of which way the person went, and continued along. Blue Jacket had taken the path I wanted to take to create a longer hike. It would have been a lot more secluded and less traveled, so for once I tried to be smart, listen to my gut, and just follow the main route back to my car. Keep it short and safe. I still had about 2 kilometers to get back to the parking lot. The clouds decided they wanted to skirt across the sky, making the woods a little dull and ominous. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling very unsettled. The trees cast finger-like shadows that did not help calm my imagination at all. One of my favorite spots on this main trail had a few huge boulders and rock formation right smack in the middle that you had to go around. Really neat for photos and climbing on normal days, but today, they filled me with even more dread. I couldn't pinpoint why at first until I noticed some scuffs around the base of the rocks going the wrong way around. The trail is very obvious which way to go, left, and these marks were wrong. It was like someone walked around the rocks dragging their foot behind them. Animal, maybe? I couldn't figure it out. I wanted to turn around and go back the way I came, but that would have added 4 kilometers to getting back to the car. I stuck close to the far side of the real path and keeping a close eye on the rock formation. As I made it to the other side of the rocks, I caught sight of some blue fabric. The same blue jacket that I saw earlier. This person moved as if ducking down between some rocks to avoid being seen. For Blue Jacket Man to reach the rocks before me, he either cut his own path through the woods or sprinted through about 5 to 6 kilometers of trails. I didn't like the thought of either option, as I did not know this person and did not want to know them at this point. Maybe he was taking a leak. Yeah, I'll go with that. I picked up my pace and dug my phone out. I texted my usual hike friend telling them all the details in case I suddenly went missing. Yes, I attempted to do this while following the path. I only walked into one tree. I glanced behind me again while the rocks were still in sight, and I saw the man standing there looking at me. I ran the rest of the way back to my car, hopped in, and immediately locked the doors. Curiously, there wasn't a single other vehicle in the parking area or on the nearby road. This place was nowhere near any town, so I have no clue where Mr. Blue Jacket came from. I took a couple of minutes to sort myself out in the car, and as I pulled out to leave, I looked at the trail ahead. There was that damn blue jacket on the signpost I had just passed to get in my car with no one visible nearby. I was so spooked by this encounter, that I refused to hike there alone ever again. Maybe it was all an innocent misunderstanding, but it sure scared the hell out of me. So this happened last year in Virginia, and is also the reason I never backpack alone anymore. I was taking summer courses at the time, and we ended up with a 3-day weekend in June, so I thought it was a great time to go explore some of the Virginian wilderness. I did a Google search, found a state park with a trail that looked nice, and I let my roommate and family know the trail I was going to be on. When I got close to the park area, I saw a little outdoor shop where people hiking the Appalachian Trail stop. I went in to grab a map of the area just in case I got lost. As I was talking to the owner, he mentioned a trail that's not well known that has a pretty cool waterfall and a swimming hole. This piqued my interest, so I had him show me on the map. It took me outside the state park, but he said it was a great place to go. I paid for the map and thanked the owner. I texted my roommate and parents about the new trail, and I parked my car and set off on my adventure. I should note that the waterfall was going to be a side trip from my journey. I was planning 3 days and 2 nights. I started on part of the Appalachian Trail, and it was pretty packed with people, and some of them were really fun to talk to. As expected, as I got further and further from the main trails, I saw less and less people. Around early afternoon, 3 miles from my destination, I noticed it was unnaturally silent. No birds, no bugs, not even wind, and I had a feeling that I was being watched. I shook it off as me overanalyzing the situation. I got to the waterfall, and it wasn't too spectacular, but it was cool to look at. Plus, it had a good-sized area to swim in, so naturally I stripped down to my skivvies and took a dip. It was pretty refreshing. As I was getting my clothes back on, I started whistling to myself. It was Chill Bill because it was stuck in my head. That's when I heard something whistling the same tune back. I thought it was a bird copying me, so I went back and forth with it, and it would repeat whatever I whistled. I thought it was pretty neat. As I was setting up camp, I couldn't shake this feeling that I was being watched again, like I would get goosebumps and my hairs would stand up. As night fell, I built a small fire and lit my jet boil to make dinner. As I did this, I became hyper-aware that again there was no sound, just deafening silence. Some part of my brain was telling me that I'm not safe and I had to leave, but I ignored it and crawled into my tent with my flashlight and book. I went to sleep without incident. When I woke up the next morning, my site was trashed. My camp stool was nowhere to be found, my bear bag with my food was cut down and the contents were thrown across the site. My first thought was a crafty animal chewed through the rope and got at the bag, but I looked at the rope and it was cut with something very sharp. Plus, none of the food was even touched. I also noticed bear footprints all around my campsite. Keep in mind that I'm at least 6 to 8 miles away from the road. As I was looking at the mess, I heard a branch snap off in the distance. I turned to look in that direction, but I saw nothing. But I heard that whistling again, my whistle from yesterday. But it was different. It sounded more sinister. It made my hair stand on end, and this is when I listened to my instincts to get the hell out of there. It sounded like it was a little off in the distance, so I packed up my camp as fast as I could. The whistling got closer as I finished stuffing the tent into my bag. I didn't bother with putting anything away properly. The whistling was incessant and sounded like it was coming from all directions. I got fed up with the whistling, stood, and I yelled into the woods, "Shut up, and what the hell do you want?" It stopped whistling, and it was quiet for a moment, and then it repeated what I said in my voice. It sounded like me, but distorted, like it came from an old television. After I heard this, I immediately threw my pack on and ran the direction I came. I heard it moving just behind me, fast switching between the whistling and my voice. I felt like it was toying with me, not coming too close, but not being too far. Eventually, it sounded like it got further and further away from me, and then it stopped suddenly. When it stopped, I stopped, and I turned around, and I wished I didn't, because I heard the most bone-chilling screech ever coming from right next to me. That's when I started running again. I didn't look, I only ran. Less than half a mile, I ran into a couple that was also backpacking. They saw the look of terror on my face and asked if that was me that screamed and asked if I was okay. I told them about what happened, and they decided not to go down from where I just came. We moved to a more populated trail as quickly as we could. As soon as I got back to my car, I drove to one of the park's ranger stations and reported what happened. Since the site was off park grounds, they told me it wasn't in their jurisdiction, but they would send a ranger to investigate. The ranger station's parking lot runs right up to the woods, and when I was getting into my Jeep, I heard the Chill Bill tune coming from the woods just in front of me. I never drove so fast in my life. When I told my roommates why I was back after only one night, all he said was, "Bro, I'm never going camping with you." A little bit of background about myself. I've worked my entire adult life in the Pacific Northwest woods. Over 15 years in total, with about 7 years of that being for the Park Service at Olympic National Park. Many experiences over the years could warrant the title of creepy. This one in particular has always stuck with me. While working for the Park Services, one of my jobs was that of a restoration carpenter. We would travel to old backcountry historical cabins, emergency shelters, homesteads, and chalets, tasked with repairing and restoring them to their original historic, accurate states. This was a wonderful and demanding job. I'd spend 8 days at a time living off the beaten path, usually deep in the backcountry. Sometimes we'd be flown in supplies, sometimes we'd use llamas or mules to pack our gear, all the while sleeping in thinly walled single tents, cooking over a fire or whisper-lit stove, using the same tools and techniques the original homesteaders had at their disposal in the late 1800s to construct and survive in this unforgiving environment. One late fall, I was assigned to work near Lake Ozette at an old homestead off the trail, near the constructed boardwalk. For those unfamiliar with the area, Lake Ozette is 8 miles long and 3 miles wide. It sits as the largest unaltered natural lake in Washington. Lake Ozette has a long and rich history of Native American culture. The Macaw Tribal Center in Nia Bay houses discoveries found in the area dating back 2,000 years, along with a local village that was well preserved over 300 years ago by a mudslide that left most of the artifacts intact. The Ozette Loop Trail, which the homestead was directly adjacent to, is approximately 9.4 miles through and through. The man-made boardwalk takes you under giant cedar groves, meanders through huge patches of chest-high salal before delivering you to Alstrom's Prairie, about 2.5 miles from the trailhead. Alstrom's Prairie, a giant soggy meadow, was once farmed by 2 Swedish immigrants. They constructed a small cabin and some outbuildings in the 150-acre bog. With cattle, sheep, vegetable gardens, and the help of little Swedish ingenuity, they managed to etch out lives for themselves here for over 50 years. Over time, the forest, as it always does, decided to take back what was once its own. The now decades-long abandoned farm was hardly recognizable, and our job was to beat back the encroaching forest, put new windows in the main cabin, pipe in a new stove, apply fresh paint, and fix up portions of the semi-dilapidated barn. The ultimate goal being to allow guided tours to take place sometime in the future. For about 3 weeks, we stayed at the Ozette bunkhouse while working at Alstrom's. This was good duty for us. We weren't sleeping under the rain, our beds were warm, our hike was short, and the terrain, not difficult. We even had TVs. The bunkhouse was located near the highway and ranger station, and we would hike the 5-mile loop every day, bringing with us boards, tools, paint, and everything else we needed on our backs. These were full 10-plus hour days, usually started our morning hike around 7 a.m., and beginning our evening return hike back to the bunkhouse around 1700. At one point during the fall, there were 4 of us working this project, but at the time of this event there were only 2 of us remaining. Most of the hard work had already been finished. We needed to hike a few last boards into the prairie and complete a portion of the woodshed before we called the job done. I volunteered to be the pack mule for the day, my only job being to carry as many boards as I could muster in each trip to the prairie before returning to the ranger station for the next load. It was late in the season for hikers at this point, The weather had turned, and we'd be lucky to see 2 or 3 people a day doing the loop. After around my 4th or 5th trip, I was pretty wiped. It was getting late in the evening now, around 1600, and my coworkers had called it a day. I thought I could get one more trip in before it got too dark, my rationale being the more trips I did today, the less I would have to do tomorrow. We passed on the trail, I told him my intentions, and continued on. I delivered the last of the boards for the day, took a look around the prairie as the sun started to tuck behind the trees, and started my hour hike back to the ranger station. The lighting on the boardwalk was quite low at this point, the cedars blocking most of the ambient light left by the setting sun, and making visibility quite diminished. I'm not a nervous hiker, and I fail to spook easily. Having solo hiked for weeks on end in the backcountry, I've been stalked by cougars, confronted by Kodiak bears in Alaska, even ran into a few demented hillbillies over the years. As I left the prairie that evening, the hair on my neck stood on end. Goosebumps erupted from my forearm and an uneasy feeling swept over me. Suddenly, I wanted to walk faster, jog, and then sprint. I didn't. Instead, I convinced myself that I'd been reading too many fantasy novels before bedtime. I walked another 5 minutes or so before I started to hear something faint, something that sounded like music. Impossible, I told myself. I'm the only one out here and still at least 2 miles from civilization. That civilization in reality being likely the only other soul out there, my coworker. Sure enough, however, I heard music. More specifically, a piano. It started out so faint that I had to stop moving and actually try to hear it, the steps on the wooden boardwalk being too loud. Every time I paused to hear it, it became unmistakable and it got louder. I stood there, sun now fully hidden behind the horizon, in total silence other than this piano. I became aware that there were no longer the noises of life. No birds, no insects, no wind, no rustling of leaves or underbrush. Absolutely nothing other than this piano. It was as if everything was being weighted down by a fog of emptiness of some sort. I've encountered this dead time before in the woods. Certain places have it, but this was different somehow. Unique to this place and unique to this moment in time. I tried to focus on the keys, but I couldn't recognize the composition. Unsurprising, as I mostly listened to Metallica and Korn at the time. It was playing with a purpose. It was controlled, in tune, thoughtful. It was a song, and somehow I felt like it was meant just for me in this moment. I started walking again. Almost on cue, the music once again got louder. As my pace increased, so did the tempo of the keys, still in tune and never faltering. It reached a climax, the perfect combination of my haste, my dread, my heartbeat, and the tempo of the music. Then as quickly as it came, the piano stopped, whooshed away in the fraction of a moment. It didn't trail off, it didn't fade into extinction, it was just gone. Suddenly everything that was absent was swept away as if by a gust of wind. The stillness was gone, the gloom, the stagnation, and weight of everything was lifted. My next step on the boardwalk was once again in reality. The evening was just as absent of light as before, but it felt like life somehow had once again injected back into the forest. The woods seemed normal again. I didn't hear the piano again that night, nor since. I told my coworker every detail when I reached the bunkhouse, and he showed no signs of disbelief. We didn't talk about it again until years later, when something similar happened to another Park Service employee. When I told my grandfather about what happened, as he was a retired park ranger who had worked nearby at Mora, the next station over, without the least bit of hesitation, he asked, "Did you hear the bagpipes along with it, or just the piano this time?" It seems, as I've learned and experienced since then, there's a lot more to that place. A lot more to the Olympics in general than anyone really knows or is willing to admit. In college, I lived up on top of a mountain road, but still only 5 minutes to town down through a trail in the woods. There was a 100-plus-year-old oak in the yard, slab stone porch built by hand. I lived in a studio apartment that was outside of my main house. Main house was haunted, but my shack was cozy. The woods up there were weird too. I never really was in the main house at all, but the 3 who lived there said some nights you couldn't sleep for all the noise. Floorboards creaking, thumps and knocks, etc. My experiences happened outside. Like I said, I hunted small game up there, as there must have been a rabbit colony in the vicinity, plus a few squirrel drays. Often out there while I was stalking, I would get the distinct feeling of being stalked myself. Keep in mind, this stand of forest is only several acres, but was preserved mainly because of the historic oak trees scattered around. It's old woods. I would hear laughter, like children's laughter, but not quite like in a creepy movie. It was a bit distorted and almost like a flirty giggle you might imagine a fairy would make. It would come from different directions each time I sought it. I eventually decided to stop following it and hunt, and it never did stop. I would sometimes spend an afternoon in town having drinks or hanging out at my friend's place. I'd finally leave and have enough liquid courage to hike back up the trail in the dark. That laughter would be replaced by noise. Just like things running all around you and dashing about the trees. I've been an outdoorsman for a long time, and I know the woods are noisy at night, particularly in the southern Appalachians, but this was different. It was dead silent out there. It was dead silent out there in that stand at night, except for this rushing to and from by some unseen feet. Not like some game fleeing, though. Deer run away and crash about doing it, but these steps were like something or things running swiftly around me. It's like it would cross the trail up ahead and then behind me, then alongside, but I could never see anything. I was a big-time night owl back then and was regularly up doing schoolwork into 3 or 4 in the morning. One such night, it had just snowed a fresh 20 inches or so, decent accumulation for the area. Our yard and the woods were like a paradise for me and my dog. I was excited to hunt around the next day for tracks and see if I could locate the rabbit den precisely. I was up working, and the dog came scratching to get in. Not frantic or anything. I let her in, and she lay down to sleep. Odd, because she's a husky and preferred the snow to my tiny heated apartment every time. I decided to call it a night too, and went out for a cigarette. It was 3:24 a.m., and I could still see it on top of my MacBook display before I closed it. I went out and noted the clouds were dispersed a bit, and the moon was bright on snow. I lit my cigarette and was just looking out across the fence and into the woods when something caught my eye. It looked just like a silhouette of somebody leaning against one of those big oak trees. Like you would see somebody with the palm planted against a wall, with the arms straight out, leaning against it. It's not moving, so I can't tell if I'm just tired or the lighting is funny or what, so I walked further to the end of the porch, and as soon as I stepped on the fresh snow there, it took off. And that thing was tall. My estimates based on the tree put the thing at 7 foot. It ran along the border of the fence and back off into the woods. It was hairless as far as I could tell, and completely naked. Otherwise though, its form was just that of a skinny, tall man. I went inside and switched to boots, grabbed my rifle and my flashlight, and I went to check the tracks. I picked up a set of what had to be size 14 or 15 bare feet tracks. It ran along the fence and down the treeless stretch of a backyard, as if heading into the woods, but then the track just ended, about 20 feet short of the wood line. I don't know if it jumped to the tree line, probably could have, but there weren't any more tracks that I could find that night or the next day. It was like it just vanished. Never really could explain that one. Hey there, friends. I hope you guys enjoyed this collection of 4 scary backwoods stories, or scary woods stories. Basically, terrifying stories that happened in the woods. Not really sure what to call it at that point. I'll figure it out whenever I make the thumbnail. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this collection of 4 honestly terrifying stories that involve woods in some way, shape, or form. And if you did, please consider joining the Nevermore. To join the Nevermore, all you have to do is click that subscribe button and the bell icon next to it, and then you're part of the Nevermore. You can do things to support the growth of the Nevermore, such as following me on, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, or sending a story my way if you have one that you would like me to read. You can also do things to support the Nevermore further by, joining me on Patreon or Ko-fi. All of these optional, and every single one of them honestly appreciated. All that said, friends, I hope you have a fantastic night and a fantastic day tomorrow and just a great week overall. Honestly, I know I've said it a few times this week, but whatever's bothering you, just know it will pass. This too shall pass. That's honestly a really good quote that was said to me by a coworker. I know I think it's biblical or something, but still, anyways, just remember that this too shall pass. Everything that is causing problems in your life, everything that's causing you to not be able to focus on what you want to do or where you want to be, it'll go away eventually. I promise. We all have those days where things are foggy, but just know that it can't rain all the time, right? Anyways, guys, I hope you have a fantastic day and a great week, and I'll see you in the next video. But until then, much love and sleep well.